Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of The Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the Director of Player Development at Inter Miami, Darren Powell. Darren, big warm welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Connor, for having me, and looking forward to our conversation. So appreciate you letting me come on the show.
Darren, as we were speaking off air before coming on, I'm in the midst of welcoming you back from a recent trip where you got into the Elon University Hall of Fame. Congrats.
Yes, thank you. It was a good weekend. I was able to spend some time with my family and reminisce a little bit about those fun times that we had at Elon. We had some many good years there, many good players that came through, and we grew a program that when I first was able to get the job as head coach there in 2005. We grew a program where there was hardly much support. There wasn't much tradition. The old coach had, started to transition from Division Three to Division Two to Division One, so it was all brand new Division One, and it was a great opportunity where there wasn't many fans at the games. There was about 35 people, and then you fast forward to the last game in the NCAA tournament against Clemson, where we managed to win on PKs, and there's almost 4,000 people around the facility that now have floodlights, have permanent goals, had stands. So it was a super exciting time, and every person that was a player and part of that program certainly helped and contributed, whether that was players and staff as well.
Obviously, it just goes to show kind of the trajectory of US soccer or football, as we'll stick to on this podcast, which has been only, I suppose, one proportion of your career. But bring us or take us back, in fact, to where it all began, Darren. And as you know, like the opening question we have for each guest that comes on the show, would you please take us through your earliest football memory?
Yeah, that was a long time ago now. So exactly those first memories. I always remember going and watch my father play, and then me and my brother being able to play on the sidelines against each other from an early age, just kicking a football and playing against each other. But my first real memory, I think, the passion for the game really began in would that be 1979. Forest were playing Cologne in the what is now the Champions League semi-final at the City Ground, and my dad picked me up from school, made us run all the way to the ground so we could get to the front of the queue or front of the line, so we could be one of the first in the stadium. So I remember getting there about 4:30 as the gates opened, and ran in for the 7:30 kickoff, and stood behind the goal, and lo and behold, Forest were 2-0 down after about 10 minutes, and it was crushed and devastated by having to wait so long to see them losing, but managed to come back 3-2. Then it was 3-3, but the back and forth game on a pitch that, when I look at the highlights, I don't remember it being so bad in terms of just a mud bath. But they were the first memories, and it was obviously a semi-final of the Champions League. And in those early years, Forest then went on and managed to win back-to-back Champions League, which will probably never happen again. But 7-year-old me thought it would happen every year. So continue to follow Forest even to this day, and glad that they're finally back in the Premier League. But that's how obviously kind of cherish those moments with my dad, and being able to go to those games. That's where he fell in love with it, especially such a great Champions League semi-final game.
Growing up in that system where football is embedded as part of the culture, uh, how difficult was it for you at the time in the 90s to take the leap of faith and go into the big, great unknown that was US soccer football at the time?
Yeah, I mean, fast forward, I was very fortunate. I was a schoolboy at Nottingham Forest. Then I got, those dreams were crushed. Basically, my 16th birthday, when I wasn't going to be offered an apprenticeship, but fortunately, tried with different clubs and ended up at Notts County across the river at 16. And there I actually met, a gentleman by the name of Pat Barrett, who was one of our coaches. He actually emigrated to the States. And in my last year at Notts County, he said, love for you to come out and join us the college system, and explain what the college system was, the NCAA. I had the qualifications from my GCSEs and BTEC that I would continue doing on day release at Notts County. and was afforded that opportunity to come over. And the head coach Michael Parker came over to watch me play in England, and sat with myself and my family and explained what it all entailed. And the dream was to still be a pro, and you were at that crossroads where I was offered a very small pro pathway in England of a couple of months, or go and get a college education and play full-time soccer in the United States. And with the World Cup coming, there was a lot of attention on the United States, for soccer. And I just felt like it was a great opportunity, and obviously no regrets whatsoever of doing that. But that was one of those sliding door moments. If you get on that plane and head to the opposite side of the world. And at that time, there wasn't many English players coming over. There was no internet, there was no email. It was all waiting for letters in the post and so on and so forth. So it was a big move, but one that I just saw potential in everything from the education side to the playing side, and always kind of intended to go back at the end of the college education and go back and play. But lo and behold, you end up staying and playing over here, and meeting my wife and having children, and been in America, and have loved every moment of the journey ever since.
And as we can decipher, I suppose the coaching bug took over, and it's interesting too because unbeknownst to myself, I mean, it featured uh, a previous guest on this podcast too, Mark Nichols.
Yeah, got into the coaching, and was in the Greensboro, UNC Greensboro College, Elon University area, and as a part-time coaching role, I would work with the club that Mark Nichols was working with, which was the NC Fusion. And the current Colorado Rapids interim head coach Chris Little was also there. So we had a lot of the top talents within the area of Greensboro, the triad areas it's referred to: Greensboro, High Point, Winston-Salem. And we had them training in the evenings. And I think the 14s, Chris the 16s, and Mark the 18s. So we had a good integration pathway without really really knowing that at the time, in terms of how powerful it can be to making sure each team is linked from age group to age group. So we enjoyed that time together, and Mark did a tremendous job on this show last week. And it's always good that we all stay in good contact with each other now, and it's great to see everyone doing so well.
And I mean, during that period, of course, Darren, I mean, when you're learning and honing your craft, what did you learn about yourself, let's say identity and values wise, which informs even the way that you operate today on the field?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, one thing that I've always valued as a coach is hard work. But I always remember sitting down with Chris and Mark, and we started putting curriculums together. And one thing we all valued at that point was the transitional moments in the game. So as you project out for young players, um, it's very important that you can do both sides of the ball. And I think from that point forward, we really emphasised that. And some of the players today will tell you second action, um, within our training session. So what does that really mean? It means like if you even when you're doing an attacking phase of play, whether the defending team wins, they have to attack immediately, and if the attacking team loses a ball, they have to defend immediately. So it's just setting up your exercises, whether they're 2v1s or 3v2s or 8v7s or 8v8, whatever it is, and what your emphasis is. But always making sure there's a second action. And when you defend, you get rewarded if you win the ball back, and when you're attacking and lose the ball, you better be quickly to try and recover it. And I think that's probably that work ethic and that desire to do so and teach players to do that, I think, was something I've learned and carried through for many years.
Because it's interesting when we speak of it like 10, 15 years ago, obviously it's a completely different ecology compared to what it is now, with the improvements not only with respect to infrastructure, resources, coaching, so on and so forth. It's like when I'm hearing you speak about that, it's like a completely different motivational climate for the player. And obviously, you going over there armed with your own footballing expertise and whatnot. It's like, for me, it's an interesting case. I mean, like back then, even. how difficult was it to achieve buy-in necessarily with those players in the system?
No, I must say was hard to get the buy-in. I think players when you influence them at young ages and then continue to do it, and put it's part of your daily standards and what you expect. You demand it out of the players, and I think they end up understanding the value of that and just seeing some of those young players progress to various different levels, whether that be collegiately and or professionally. Those players, even to this day, some of the players that we had within even Elon and those young players, um, I think they see the value in that and understand that, and it helps them separate themselves from fellow competitors and you know fellow players that can play in the same position at the same level, so to speak.
Yeah, because even taking it through to the present end, to probably ask a better question is, I mean, of course, your role is quite broad at Inter Miami, and obviously you're director of player development there, and of course, a key facet of that workload, of course, is your work with individuals, the IPP work. So it's like, I mean, what informs your work there with the player with respect to the IPP? In fact, like how critical is it understanding person before the player at the behest of any plan?
Yeah, 100%. I think that getting to know the person first, I think, is massively important. I think that helps because it gives you some connect points and you can figure out some motivation points for the player. But the biggest thing, in the role that I take a lot of pride in into Miami is it's those steps. So what's it take to get to the next step? Because there's always a next step. Maybe not for Mr. Messi, but there's always a next step for players, and I think it's so important to prepare them for that. So, for example, a U17 wants to get to the second team. Well, what does those workloads look like? What does that ability look like? What's that decision making look like at the next level? Why they're at the U17s? So you're coaching those top prospects. So when they make that next step, when they get that opportunity, they're more prepared for it. And then it's the same once you make the second team. How can I get you? How can you now transition into the first team? So what does that look like? You're performing well, but how are you going to perform in front of a full stadium with all the eyes looking at you when you make a bad pass? How are you going to act? How are you going to react? And I think that's the big thing with all those players is making sure that they're prepared for that next step on the journey. And then when they get the opportunity, because they're more prepared, they're gonna do better and excel quicker in that environment. So what does that look like? Again, that's those daily contact points with the player and the person, but then obviously the structure of training and making sure that they understand their position, they understand the technical requirements, the tactical requirements, the physical requirements of what it is at the next level. So that's how you kind of frame the IDPs and the individual training programs.
Interesting for me too, because inherently within that Darren too, you allude to having a strong understanding as to when to accelerate player pathways for unique individuals. What are some possible touch points or key indicators that coaches should be receptive to in that regard?
Yeah, I think once a player starts to excel at the level they're in, and when I say excel, that's not one game. That's not, and that's what you have to explain to young players. It's putting a body of work together. So let's just say, for an example, 10 games of really good work, dominant performances, and starting to excel at their current level. Then you need to stretch that player. You need to push that player. So a dominant U17 player, for example, that is played 10 games. Now you start sprinkling them into the next level. Doesn't have to be 100% into the second team, for example. It could be just 2 or 3 trainings a week to start out with, and then as he starts to put a body of work together there, and then those opportunities come when you obviously into the game, and then that same transition process happens again. Once you can put a body of work together, say for this example, 10 games where they're consistent in performance, consistent with their attitude, consistent with the physical loads, then now you can start again to stretching that boundary of that player to prepare him for that next level.
It's interesting because it all kind of dovetails nicely into the next point, which is I was listening to you in prep for this on David and Keith's podcast, Gold Dust, and I'll link that in the show notes below. It's a fantastic listen. And they asked you at the end, I mean, what your biggest curiosity was at the present time, and it was how players in any domain or any sport get to the top. So, I mean, since you mentioned those words in the Gold Dust podcast, what have you learned about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, look, the boys with Inter Miami this year have had wonderful opportunities. So you can see them, um, excelling even at the first team level. Ben Hakamrashi has just been named to the full national team, and at U16 was playing with Weston's academy, then our academy at U17. During that U17 year, he's then broke into the second team, and now he's fully fledged in the first team, playing really well. And same with David Ruiz, Noah Allen, Edison Asconi, and Frey. There's been several this year that have broken into the first team level, and I think it just goes to see what they have, and they all have a super strength within their own game. So something that stands out. So for example, um, like the desire of Ben Har and the ability to get from one side of the pitch to the other side of the pitch is fantastic. David's pressure in midfield onto opposing players is very, very good. And so they're their super strength. So all these players have a super strength, and it's making sure that the other aspects of the game, super talented, which they are, and then making sure that the character of that player and that determination doesn't cease. They're always trying to make themselves better, always trying to be the best version of themselves. And any player I've worked with over the years, that I can use Danny Lovitz as an example from Elon University that's now at Nashville, and also represented the USA. But his determination every day, the competitiveness of all these players is a lot higher than the average player, and you see that. Couple that with a super strength, and then these players seem to progress through. So, do I have the answer? No, I probably never will have that answer correct. But these are all observations that you take a good note of when you're looking and working with players. And then, as a developer, then it's your job to share that with the next generation that's coming through.
Yeah, it's interesting there when you speak of the next generation too, because obviously working at Elon, working at a college system, San Antonio, which we haven't even discussed to the present day at Miami. Obviously, there's a few different iterations there without without paying notice to your age, Darren. There's a few few different generations of player coming through the system. So obviously, there's a lot of hype at the moment about Generation Z and the type of player that they are. I mean, how has your own understanding of development and indeed the tools that you use as a developer have had to change, have had to adapt?
Yeah, I always use. I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but I always use it's like movie ratings. When you're working with a 12-year-old, it's a Disney. When you're working with first team players, it's a little more adult. So it's that movie rating. So it's just scaling. Football is always the same. Football, the game is the same for a 12-year-old to an adult, but obviously the demands of the game are slightly different on several different categories in terms of again, the technical, tactical, and physical, and obviously the mental component as well. They're all different, but for me, I think each generation that comes through, it's just setting it up, connecting, and having an understanding of young players. For example, we had a great conversation with our U14 coach the other day in terms of how to present video, and one of the ideas with the 14s is instead of just sharing video with them, maybe opportunities where you put them into small groups. And we hear a lot now that there's not as many leaders in the game, there's not as many players willing to step in front of a group. Okay, so how can we nurture that where there's a confidence? So maybe we're watching video, you're working in small groups, and the players are presenting back to the team, and now you're also nurturing leaders. They're looking at observations and they're seeing it using themselves, which this generation is very good with instant, going back and watching the games and seeing themselves. They tend to watch them, a lot of themselves as well. So how does that then impact the team? And all different ways of trying to be creative and innovative. And I think that is probably the biggest thing, is always trying to find ways to be able to connect and help players, and that's the goal. You want to help the players get better, and help them realize their own ambition. So, as a coach, and as adults, we try and be innovative and talk these things and then try them. And I think what you find, if you're brave and try a few things, you're going to get some good feedback and good responses from the players. I think players ultimately want to know that you care and you want to try and make them better.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be the case truly in the environment in which you are at the moment, because I mean, with all due respect too, there's been a lot of rightly so praise for the likes of Lionel Messi, Jordi Alba, Sergio Busquets getting all the plaudits down there. However, there was something that drew my attention quite a while ago. It was a game you guys played against DC United, which I'd imagine was a game of immense pride for the club, having six homegrowns out there in the field. And it's something unique. Obviously, Benjamin Kramaski will get a lot of the plaudits too, right? Recently capped by the US men's national team. But for me, that's a key. It's a bright vision of the future to see that squad that day between your DPs, the likes of Messi, the likes of your DPs, and then having so many homegrown talents there. It's a pretty
Yeah, I
great.
mean, yeah, no, it's an amazing feeling. I was very fortunate at the DC United game, 2-2. Ben Hur scored his first goal. I think Noah Allen scored his first goal. There was six of them there. So, having the honour of debuting those guys at the MLS two level, within the last 2 years, it was immense to see that, and we perhaps could have won that game 3-2 if the linesman didn't raise his flag for Davies Ruiz to get a third one, which would have been nice to get 2 extra points. But no, it was an amazing experience. And then to see these boys continue now, under Tata and the new coaching staff, and when Messi scored the free kick in his first game, and just seeing like Noah Allen just with the smile, his eyes lit up, chasing him. You do feel a lot of pride when you see these young men go through, and for me as a coach, and I'm sure any other coach, and any young coach, that's where it gives you those goosebumps. It gives you that really powerful feeling that there's not one person that has contributed to these players getting there, but it's a community, and you're part of that community, part of that journey. And it was quite surreal when you see Noah Allen chasing Messi after Messi's first goal. That 2 years ago, you're working with him and helping him in games, in games in the USL one.
I think it's absolutely fantastic what you mentioned there. Speaking of community, as in fact, that's when I find the best coaching is done too, and it's beyond the surface level, it's beyond the transactional level, it's beyond the white lines. That coach athlete relationship, and I think it's so intact and it's tantamount to all the good work that's going on too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's why not everybody can experience what the players that made it to the first team, but there's been a lot of young players on the same journey, and they've helped those young players get there. And I think it just keeps that community, and if they're in the college, with their college teams, and they've been playing alongside these players, you take immense pleasure from that. And I think that's what the system does. It's not going to get everybody through. It's a small percentage that can play at the real high levels and first team football. But I think all those players have to see the value in being a part of that journey with somebody that has come through the system as well.
Yeah, the positive role model I think is an absolute key facet too. But I mean, earlier on in the show, you spoke of when you're speaking to players, speaking about next steps, milestones in their own developmental journey. I mean, what about you as a developer and Inter Miami as a club too? Because This season, obviously, the club has raised the bar and set the standards so high in terms of what's expected and coming through the ranks. How do you guys envisage and plan to keep that bar high and, in fact, build and, again, not only sustain, but build on top of it?
Yeah, I think I think it's just making sure we maintain a really good, positive integration from the academy into the second team and players coming through. And the coaching staff at Inter Miami, the academy director now, Victor Pastore, um, the second team head coach, Fede Higuain, and then all the academy staff below. There's a really good, again, I say the word community again, but there's good camaraderie amongst the group. And, it's really important we just keep those lines of players and pushing the players. And ultimately knowing now we've got stories that are players reaching the MLS. So now it's a question of who's next. And with the people in place and the guidance, even from Chris Henderson, the sporting director, all the way through the club, I think is what is a strength into Miami. And anywhere I've been before, whether that be San Antonio or Orlando, I think that is the strength. It is the staff and the people being able to communicate, being on the same page, and then being able to push the players on a daily basis.
Absolutely fantastic. Darren, I mean, I've taken great notes here to my right hand side of what you guys are doing at Inter Miami to bridge that developmental gap. And I'd have to thank you so much for coming on today because it's been a pleasure and a delight to listen. But for those listening too, that are that slightly bit inspired by your own career path to date and the work that you're in fact doing now at Inter Miami, what would be the key bit of advice you'd have for them if they wish to thread a similar path?
I think I think the most important thing for me, for a young coach, is to make sure the session is for the players. It's not about the coach; it's about the players. So again, the hard work, the being on time, the basics that every coach should do. But I think it's just making sure that the session is for the players. So, you put your aspects in there, you have your objectives, you have how you want to set up the session. But once you're on the grass and once the balls start rolling, just make those interventions at a timely fashion. Let the game do it because young players want to play, they want to compete, and you see a lot of coaches sometimes, especially starting out, want to express all their knowledge. No, just little bits, bite size each time for each session, build upon it. But remember, the session is about the players, and the players want to play. So get them playing, get them on the ball as much as possible, and you'll see the smiles on their faces, and you'll be able to achieve the goals and the objectives that you want from your session. And sometimes it takes maybe some creative ideas and longer to plan, but do your planning and make the session about the players.
Fantastic. Darren, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me, and it's been an absolute pleasure as well.